Wow, we're on the air. This is like crazy exciting because I didn't expect it to go this so well. Of course, I'm Louis Porter Jr. and I'm here with my very special guest. Introduce yourself.
I'm Sean K Reynolds.
Sean K Reynolds. Oh my God, it's so exciting. Sean K Reynolds is probably, I'd say you're probably the most controversial Pathfinder guy.
I'm definitely very opinionated, yes.
That's not a crime. I don't see that as a crime. I don't see a problem with that, but that's just me. All right, let's ask all the starter important questions. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about your background.
I grew up in California, and I started playing D&D when I was around 10 years old. And after college, I got a job as the online guy for TSR, wrangling its draconian internet policy. And when Wizards of the Coast bought TSR, I joined the design team, and I worked on Greyhawk, Forgotten Realms, and D&D. And then I left Wizards to work on video games and work on card games for Upper Deck, and then about 6 years ago I started working for Paizo as a developer and then eventually joined the design team. Now I'm doing my own thing as a partly freelance, mostly self-employed game designer working on my own game.
And do you like that more, being freelance and go and do your own thing, than you were before?
It has its ups and downs. I mean, definitely, when you work for somebody else, it's nice to have a regular paycheck, but it's really, I know, but it's really rewarding to be able just to choose what projects I want to work on, and I get to make all the decisions about my projects, and I don't have to worry about, having disagreements with other designers. It's just me talking to myself.
So when you're by yourself, because I know it happens a lot as designers, who do you bounce the information and the stuff you're doing off of? Are you just like, I'm just going to take a chance and see what happens, and, or do you like, hey, let me call so-and-so? I mean, I know for myself, Owen is like my soundboard. I would say he's the most common sense guy I know, so I'll call him. And it's like, does this sound stupid? And then we say, like, yeah or no, and you can get that.
Well, fortunately, my wife is a gamer, and a lot of these concepts for the Five Moons RPG that I'm working on are actually things that we have kind of bantered about on our car trip out to Indiana that we did in April of last year. And so she's kind of my sounding board. She's played First Edition and Second Edition D&D. She's played Third Edition. She's played Pathfinder, and she's really into all sorts of video games. So she's definitely a gamer girl, and I really value her perspective on game design ideas. And she's very much of the sort of gamer who doesn't like to have rules get in the way of the fun. And so because my focus for this game is very much, hey, you know what, this is really complex, we can just take it down a notch, simplify it, and just let people have a little more creativity and freedom to do what they want. She's a perfect sort of person to run an idea by. I also have some talented people doing some freelance for me. Robert Emerson, who has done some stuff for Paizo and for Wright Publishing. He's my lead guy for Monsters, and Jesse Benner, who has done stuff for RPG Superstar and a lot of stuff for Paizo and other publishers. He's going to be writing my first adventure for this game, and so he's also taken a stab at the first run on some of the spells. So having worked for Paizo for a long time, I actually made a lot of contacts with people in the freelancing community, and so I have a lot of people who I can just rely on to get a good opinion on things.
No, that's always good. That's always good. So bouncing back and forth, because I know, as we know, it's designing. I guess is a lonely job. Is the best way to describe it. It's all in your head, and you're making stuff up, and you're saying to people, "Oh, is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? Do you like this? Do you like that?" And sometimes you do crazy things that sound great when you do them, but not so much when you really put them out there.
Yeah.
All right, let's ask some goofy questions. What is your favorite of all time role-playing game?
Well, that's a really complicated question because I've played a lot of games, just like all of us have, and there's little bits and pieces that I like from each one. And if I was really to come up with, an ideal system, it would have little bits of First Edition D&D and some of the simplicity of basic D&D and some of the universal rules of Tunnels and Trolls and perhaps some of the easy way to level up your characters from Star Frontiers or for the old Marvel Superhero Space Rip game. And then you've got little weird bits. I mean, I worked on Monty Cook's World of Darkness with Monty Cook, and so there's a lot of vampire and werewolf sort of influence on how those game systems work. So, I mean, it's not a really easy answer, but most of the gaming that I've done has been some variant of D&D, and what I've been trying to do with Five Moons is kind of go back to the basics in terms of some of the simplicity and the openness and the ability that the GM can just make decisions about things, but still have some of the ability to build your character in unique ways that Pathfinder and Third Edition really allows. So it's probably some kind of hybrid of First and Third Editions would be my ideal.
Okay. So, and your favorite genre to play in? Is it just strictly fantasy, or you like sci-fi?
It's definitely fantasy. I mean, I liked a little bit of comic book sort of stuff. I played and ran a lot of Marvel superheroes back in the day, and never really got into the sci-fi much. I think it's mainly because I understand that certain elements of sci-fi could potentially happen in my lifetime, and so they are less fantastic than something like, oh, there's a dragon or there's a wizard or that sort of thing. But I mean, I've worked on Alternity, and I actually did the Magic and Superhero systems for the Alternity game system for Wizards of the Coast / TSR. So, and there's a lot of crossover, but definitely fantasy is my go-to. Probably about 80% of my library is fantasy books.
And what's like the biggest issue you've noticed when you're designing, especially for other people, not for your own stuff? Because your own stuff, it's whatever you want to do. But for somebody else, what's the always pops up that always happens? You're like, oh, I wish this didn't happen, but every time it does.
Well, most of my experience in the past 14 years has been working on Third Edition or Pathfinder, which is an expansion of Third Edition, and they are both a very complex rule system that has a lot of rules for handling every single tiny little detail for some things. And a lot of times it's like, you know what, I just want the adventure to go this way or the rules to go this way, but we already have a precedent that there's a rule that works a certain way, and it was decided upon by somebody 5, 10, or 15 years ago, and our awareness of how games should play or how we want the game to play or why those rules fit together with new stuff that isn't 5 or 10 years old really has changed over time. And so many times it's like, yeah, you know what? You can follow this convoluted chain of logic as to why this feat and this spell and this magic item shouldn't work at all or should create some broken combination. But it's really fun to just say, you know what? I want the game to do this, and just let it happen. So many times the developers at Paizo would come to the design team, and they would say, I have this guy as an NPC, and I need him to be able to do this thing. Can he do that under the rules? And Stephen and Ryan McFarlane, shared an office, and Stephen's answer is generally, what do you want them to do? And just have them do that. You don't have to go and follow every single bit of the rules. You don't have to explain how this person does that. It's just like, you know what? If it's interesting that this monster doesn't have a face, and it's some weird undead creature that doesn't have a face, and it senses things via life sense, kind of like an undead does, and you just want to say it can see things by life force, and it doesn't have a mischance due to blindness, just let that work. Like, the Death Watch spell. Just let that work. And you don't have to go and nitpick it and say, well, technically you have to have a mischance for every single one of those, and he only has a 30-foot range, and he has to recast it every 10 minutes because the casting time is this much, the duration is... It's like, you know what? He can see life auras. He's an undead monster with no face. You know how this is supposed to work. Just play the game and have fun. And that's really the most frustrating thing, is that you just get so many arguments that are like, well, there's this one book from over here, and this rule, and this scenario says this, and so that should never work, and that's dumb. It's just like, is this fun for you? Like, the part of the game is the sitting at the table and playing and having fun. If the arguing rules is the fun part for you, maybe you should go to law school, because that's really what you're trying to do, is argue law.
Yeah, I've had that happen. Yeah, that's a little disturbing. All right, there's some questions coming in. Okay, let me see this one. Okay, all right, here's a great one. Someone had a very bad first impression of you on the ACG playtest. Do you think that's because people are a little too sensitive, like I believe, or maybe you're really a horrible person and you've eaten babies on the weekends?
It's really funny because I do have this online persona where I'm very argumentative, and like, I don't take any crap from people, and if people try and dish out any crap to me, I dish it back to them, and all of a sudden they're like, this is unprofessional because you're being a total a-hole to me. It's like, well, you were an a-hole to me first, buddy, so you kind of made your own bed, and I don't pull punches when somebody starts making mama jokes and that sort of thing. But the funny thing,
that's the level.
I mean, there was a discussion back when Gary Gygax was alive, and he was quoted in an interview with his publisher, Sylvan Crossroads, I think, and he said, oh, I think that the OGL was a bad decision for Wizards of the Coast because it didn't make them any money. And I said, you know what? all respect to Gary Gygax, but he's wrong. That allowed Wizards of the Coast to focus on their core model of producing source books and let other people make these low-profit adventures, and everybody was writing stuff for D&D, and that meant that everybody was buying Player's Handbooks, and that really helped Wizards of the Coast. Now, things changed over time as we got a bit of a D20 glut, but the core of it is, no, the D20 helped Wizards of the Coast, when you look at it from this framework. People lost their minds that I disagreed with Gary Gygax. Like, some people actually said, your mom should have aborted you.
Wow.
Yeah. So that is the level of hatred I sometimes have to deal with. And it's ridiculous. And the funny thing is that people who've met me in person know that, like, I'm very talkative, I'm very pro-gaming, like, whatever game you want to play, that's fine. If you like 4th edition, 5th edition, Pathfinder, 3rd edition, old school gaming, that's all cool. Sit down, have fun. I'm not going to get into an edition war. I think it's good to be able to talk about the thing that you like without talking down about the thing that isn't your cup of tea. And so I have, like, all these positive interactions with people, but what they can see is the online stuff because that's frozen there forever. And the interesting thing about the Events Class Guide is that, one, it was basically at the tail end of my time at Paizo, and I had started to get really frustrated with a lot of things going on with the Paizo message boards. There were a lot of people who were very argumentative. They would go out of their way to attack the staff, and I was basically chosen to be the person to write all the frequently asked questions, and I never really wanted to do that. Like, when they added the FAQ system for the Paizo boards, originally it was going to be, all right, the 3 designers are going to tackle these questions, and we're going to post regular updates. But I was the one who's basically allocating the most time to doing this, because Vic, the co-owner of Paizo, would say, how come we haven't had any facts answered in a couple of weeks? And I'd be like, oh, crap, okay, we're going to answer a fax that, Vic is knowing that we are doing our job here. But over and over again, it was just me doing a fact, me doing a fact, me doing a fact. And actually, I added up the stats at one point. I realized, we have like 120 facts from the past 9 months, and about 95 of them are things that I took the initiative and wrote it, and I said, here's the information. What do you guys think about this answer? Everybody good with this? Okay, this is what we're going to post. And unfortunately, because I was the one posting these answers, everybody looked to me as the fact guy and would argue against the stuff that I'd said, when a lot of times everything that we did for a fact was the consensus of the design team, which meant that all 3 of us looked at it and we all signed off on it. However, Jason Bowman is the lead designer of Paizo, and so if he thinks a rule should work a certain way, it doesn't matter if Steve and I have a really good argument against that. If Jason decides, what, I get that you have this argument, but I really think it should be this other way, he's the lead designer and it goes this way. So that meant that I was often in the position of, all right, Jason, let's work out how you want this FAQ to be written, and we'll post that. And people would disagree with Jason's ruling and would argue against it, and I was in the position of defending it when I actually disagreed with it. There are a few of these facts where, like, we talked about disarm properties in weapons, and people said, well, I don't think there's any benefit to disarm weapons because all it does is gives you this very mild bonus. And I said, I agree. I don't like this fact ruling myself. But people would assume that this was Sean's decision and Sean's ruling because I was the one writing it and responding to people. And so then people would want to go to Jason for a correction. It's like, you can't go to Mom if you don't like Dad's answer. This is the design team's answer. And so after being in this position for like a year, I said, you know what? I sent an email to Jason and Eric. It's like, I'm done doing facts for a while. I'm just getting really frustrated by this. People are getting really argumentative, and I don't want to be bearing this burden for the entire design team because, like, in my annual review, they said, Sean, you tend to argue with people too much on the website. And so I said, okay, you know what? I argue with people because I'm doing all these facts. Let me take the facts off my plate. And 3 months went by, and there were no new facts posted. And so they came to me and said, Sean, you cannot just say I'm not going to do facts anymore. So this is now your job. You're the point man for doing facts. It's like, you told me not to argue on the boards. I argue on the boards because I'm doing facts. This is supposed to be a group responsibility. I'm the only one doing it. And now you're forcing me to be in this position where I have to argue these things. So it's like, okay, fine. So after 2 more years, that's just like everything I do is just everything turns into arguing on the boards. And like I mentioned earlier, there's so much detail in all the Pathfinder rules that so many of the FAQ questions now are about dotting your I's and crossing your T's. Like, well, how does this particular feat work with this spell and this class ability? And a lot of people have built a character based on exploiting an unusual relationship between those three things. And if the design team says, yeah, you really shouldn't be able to do that, then people are like, you're destroying my character, you've invalidated my character, why should I play this game? Rah! And so it's just little tiny petty battles about things that don't need to be fought about. It's like, you know what? This happens because there's an organized play situation where you need to have everybody running the game exactly the same way. And third edition really, it took a lot of the rules elements out of the hands of the GM and put them in the hands of the PCs or the players with the intent of saying, all right, GMs, you don't have to worry about remembering what the DC for a climb check is or a jump check or something like that. The players will know what this is. A slimy wall is this DC, an upside-down wall is this DC. And because you don't have that burden of knowing all those rules, you can focus more on the story. What ended up happening is you get in a situation where the GM's like, well, this is a DC 22 climb check. And the player's like, no, this should be a DC 20. I should be able to make that. It's like, no, this is a DC 22. I'm the GM. I'm saying this is a DC 22. And he ends up creating this GM versus player sort of mentality. And with all these tiny little rules, that's just more and more places where the GM can't just make a ruling and move on. You have to have an official ruling from a designer on the message boards or in a FAQ. Otherwise, your GM's an idiot.
Whew. Very interesting. Very interesting. I have a very important question that came in from a gentleman. I think you might know him, Adam Daigle. He says, "Do you miss me? I miss you dancing out from the cubicle."
Adam is a great guy. I worked with Adam as a freelancer, and then when he came on board as a developer at Paizo, it was great to have him around. Adam is talented, he's funny, and we both love to tease Rob McCreary about stupid, crazy crap. And yes, Adam, I definitely miss you. I miss the fact that I don't have as many people who will appreciate that I'll come dancing out of my cubicle to various random songs or dance in the warehouse and distract them from working. I do have a couple of videos of me dancing that various people took in the warehouse that I need to post to my YouTube channel just as proof of, if you ever want to have a reason to blame, like, why is my shipment late? You can just say, oh, well, Sean was apparently dancing that month in the warehouse and everyone was focused on that instead of getting your shipments out. I take the blame for that.
Okay. Here's an interesting question. Do you think having simultaneous Kickstarters was detrimental? Also, will Obsidian Apocalypse Adventure Path be relaunched? Well, let me answer the quick one. Yes, it will sometime. I don't know when. I don't know. It will, though. We have people working. And then we pass the other part off to Sean. Do you think doing simultaneous Kickstarters was detrimental? Because I think we ran ours, I think, at the same time.
Well, I think that's kind of two questions in one. One of them is, like, if I'm running a Kickstarter and you're running a Kickstarter, those are two simultaneous Kickstarters, is that detrimental? And I think the answer is no, because we don't necessarily have the same audience. The people who want to go and buy into my weird little Goody White does a bunch of kooky, real-world pagan spells as Pathfinder spells and witch hexes is a very different audience from the people who want to buy into your post-apocalyptic campaign setting. So just in the same way that there are going to be people who want to watch 50 Shades of Grey or people who want to watch Jupiter Ascending or watch the Avatar sequel, there's a market out there. Now, on the other hand, you can see some games that are just like dominating everything in Kickstarter. And it's like, well, why is this gigantic company who can afford to pay people for 5 years to make a game, why are they kickstarting this game? This happens a lot with video game people. And not to criticize video game groups in general, like I have a lot of friends in the video game industry, but when you look at that, it's like, oh, this video game Kickstarter got $5 million, and these 10 indie game publishers didn't hit their $5,000 funding level. It's like, oh, well, maybe there is some overlap, just because that $5 million market is so big compared to these. Like, you could have had these guys go at only the $4 million level and still get these ones funded. But I think that's just partly an issue of getting the word out. Now, the other half of the question of simultaneity is, I had a Kickstarter that ended right before Gen Con for Goody White, and I had one that started about a month after Gen Con for Five Minutes RPG. And those Kickstarters weren't simultaneous, but I was working on one of them while I was working on the second one. Like, the product design was kind of overlapping. And since this is all me, and I'm the only one designing this, there is definitely a competition for my own time. But for the Goody White one, that was really a learning process for me to say, I'm going to have a small Kickstarter just to do one little one-off book for a system that everybody knows and everybody's familiar with, for me to learn how running a Kickstarter works. And then I took that small success, and I was able to go and take the Five Moons Kickstarter and actually make it into a larger scale, but still small success. I mean, compared to something like Humanera or The Strange, at Goody White did something like $36,000 as opposed to $300,000. But still, $36,000 was like 115, 120% of the original goal, which is great. So it's, I mean, as a small independent publisher, you really have to wear a lot of hats, and there isn't really any training for how to run a Kickstarter other than doing a Kickstarter. So you just got to wear that hat, and sometimes you're wearing multiple hats at once, and they stack up and look kind of comical like a Dr. Seuss illustration.
Yeah. So just in case people can hear us in the background, my son, of course, is crying about something. My parents are here, of course, looking for a new house. So I know my father's running to take care of him. So I'm not going to actually look at the door, because I know if I look at the door, he'll just come in, because that's what happens when the door is closed, as we all know watching my videos. Because God knows it isn't a video from mine if my son doesn't come bursting in asking me about chocolate or candy or something like that. So for all you wondering, saying, hey, is that his son in the background crying? Yes, there's someone there taking care of him. I'm not that horrible person. It's crazy at my house.
And I'm sure you can hear one of my cats meowing in the background, but he's part Siamese. They're very vocal. They talk all the time. He'll meow himself while he plays, so it's fine.
Yeah. How about the infamous water balloon argument? Are you saying that was all Jason's thing?
So in the context here is people were discussing why crossbows are worse than regular bows in Pathfinder. And the answer at the time that I gave was, well, on some level, the game is trying to model reality, in that a dagger is a worse weapon than a longsword. And that's why on Earth, people go to war and you equip all your soldiers with spears or longswords. You don't equip them and say, okay, this is your main weapon. Your weapon is a dagger. In the same way that a crossbow can't fire as often as a longbow can, because in real life, a crossbow can't fire as often as a longbow can. And so part of the game's expectation is, at least at the low levels, is that you're trying to emulate something that's mostly like reality, so that you can understand that, hey, this is a 5-foot pit. I know that an average athletic adult human can jump over a 5-foot pit, especially if they take like a running start. And so therefore I know that my character can make a similar jump. Otherwise it's like, okay, I come across a 1-foot gap in the ground. Can I jump across that? I have no idea. 100-foot gap. Can I jump that? I have no idea. The game is trying to go and model what a regular human person can do on Earth, because you have humans on Earth and you have humans in the game world. And so crossbows versus longbows. And there's a very angry discussion. It's like, why is crossbows such a crappy option in the game compared to longbows? And the answer is crossbows are not as good as longbows are on Earth. You can build a crossbow that has more power, but to get the rate of fire that you'd get with a longbow, you have to spend like 2 or 3 additional feats. And it sucks. I mean, I totally admit it. It sucks. And I made a flippant comment at the time. It's like, yeah, you know what? We don't have rules for water balloon throwing in the game, but I understand you people who are arguing that you want crossbows and longbows to be, you know, have parity in the game. But at what point do you say even ridiculous weapon combinations should have parity, like throwing water balloons? It's like, well, how come my water balloon wielding fighter doesn't do as much damage as the crossbow guy or the longbow guy? And the answer is, it's like, well, duh, you know, water balloons don't deal damage like they do on Earth, and so your game is trying to model that. Now, that was not anything to do with Jason. That was just how the rules are. That's how the rules are with 3rd edition. They dated back to long before Jason was a professional in game industry. It's just crossbows are not as good as longbows. But in the intervening years since having that discussion, I've realized that, you know what, if your character's theme is Legolas and you want to be awesome with a bow, that's great. And if this other person's character's theme is Daryl from The Walking Dead and they want to be awesome with a crossbow, that's also great. And you shouldn't punish that second player just because they have chosen a weapon that on Earth is inferior to the weapon that is superior on Earth. So you shouldn't say, yeah, Daryl guy, you're awesome with the crossbow, but you're never going to be as good as the Legolas character because you chose a crossbow. It's like, oh, that's lame. You know, like I had no way of just skimming the rules to know that this weapon is inherently poorer than this other weapon. And if you look at games like World of Warcraft, where it's a fantasy world and they're willing to throw out certain aspects of physics, like they don't even have ammunition in Warcraft. They used to have ammunition, and hunter characters have to go and carry around bags and bags of 200, 400, 600 arrows just to be able to get through an entire raid. But now that you have this thing in the game called transmogrification, where it's like, hey, you know what? My character has always used a crossbow, and I got this really cool bow as a piece of loot from this boss. I'm going to go to these guys in town that are going to transmog my bow into a crossbow. It's going to have the exact same game sets as that bow. It just has a different cosmetic look. And it's like, you know what? There's no reason why the longbow guy has to be better than the crossbow guy just because longbows are better than crossbows on Earth, because we're not playing on Earth. The game world is already bending or outright breaking some of the physics that we assume is going on in Earth. Like, on Earth, you don't have insects that are the size of a bear, because insects have a passive respiration system that once their bodies get to be a certain size, the interior parts can't absorb oxygen through their exoskeletons, and they suffocate. But in Pathfinder or D&D, yeah, giant spiders, giant ants, giant scorpions, totally fine. The square cube law for physics says that a creature the size of a dragon should not be able to fly with the wingspan that it has. It would have to have like a wingspan of a football field for a dragon the size of a Volkswagen Bug to fly. And yet we totally accept that dragons can fly, non-magically, just the same way with giant insects. Like, giant insects don't suffocate when you cast Dispel Magic on them. Giants, creatures of the giant subtype. On Earth, the square cube law says that when you build up a creature that's bigger and bigger, its limbs are going to have to get broader in cross-section to support that weight. That's why elephants have thick legs. But in Pathfinder and D&D, giants are proportioned just like humans. So you're already saying, yeah, you know what? I'm totally cool with certain aspects of generic fantasy saying physics goes away, Earth physics goes away, it doesn't matter. And so if you're already accepting that, you should be able to accept that crossbows could have the same reload time as a longbow and could have the same rate of fire as a longbow, because you don't want to punish a character for this choice that really in the long run doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make a difference if you have a crossbow or a longbow. Let the player be a cool bow guy or a crossbow guy. And if you really want to be the character who's got water balloons and you can come up with a plausible reason for that and it makes sense for the character and it isn't stupid for your campaign, then go ahead and have that happen. I mean, there's so many examples of weird-ass character types in anime and in comic books that, hell, Gambit from the X-Men, he charges up playing cards with his mutant power and throws them at people and they deal damage. It's just like, okay, Gambit can go toe-to-toe, like next to Wolverine, and kill people with playing cards. Bullseye, who is a non-supernatural character in the Marvel Universe, he can kill people with anything. He can throw a paperclip and kill somebody. He can throw a playing card and kill somebody. When you're at that level of superhuman skill in the game, it doesn't matter whether it's magic or not. It doesn't matter if it's realistic or not. What matters is, are you able to play the cool character that you want to play and have fun in the campaign?
That is definitely what's important. Adam has another question. This is an abstract question, so that was kind of interesting. Is it harder being a vegetarian gamer when convention travel is concerned?
Yeah, because most convention travel is you're living off various types of pizza and hot dogs and hamburgers and things like that. It's gotten better in the past few years just because you have a lot of places like Chipotle that are nearby, and I mean, I usually stock up on my own snacks just to have in case, like I have power bars and things like that. But yeah, that's a choice I make, and I have to deal with it.
I can understand that one. Okay. How do you deal with people going against your design work and frankly disliking you as a designer? How do you handle that?
You know, my wife has really influenced me a lot in the past few years just to not deal with the haters, because so many times you see people on social media who spend time engaging with the people who are arguing with them and yelling at them when they could be spending time like chatting up the people who are like, hey, you're really great, and I love the show that you're working on, or I love this movie that you did. And yeah, you know what? You can't please everybody. And when it comes to games, people are going to have a different feel for what they like to play in. And my own gaming tastes have changed over the past 34 years, and so I'm sure I would disagree even with stuff that I used to do back when I was a teenager in terms of gaming. And so if I disagree with somebody about how a rule should work, or someone disagrees with me, it's like, yeah, you know what? That's okay. You can have fun with your game, your way, your home game. No one is going to kick down your door and have the game police tell you that you're wrong and take away your character sheet. And if you think that I'm a big jerkhole because I made a ruling in the official Pathfinder rules about how your character should or should not work, then I'm sorry that you think that way, but you can disregard any rule that you want for your home game. And then if you're playing PFS, then PFS has its own set of rules, and the design team informs that. But I mean, it's really easy to dwell on the negative because a lot of negativity has a higher volume than the positivity. But I think just in general, it's best to say, you know what, I'm just going to let this go. You're clearly upset about this, and you think that I should have been aborted. That's your opinion. I'm just going to move on with my life. And the truth is that I've been in a movie about gamers. I've won an award for my game design. I have a Wikipedia page about me. I work for TSR, and so I have a track record of doing at least some things that some people really liked, and so I'm going to focus on that instead of the people that I think I'm one of the three worst game designers alive right now. The other two probably being Monty Cook and Bruce Cordell.
Oh, nice. That's a
And
nice.
that is a verbatim quote. There are people who say that the bottom three game designers are Sean K Reynolds, Monty Cook, and Bruce Cordell.
Nice, nice. It's good to be, it's good to be notorious for something.
It's good company. That's what I'm saying. Like, I love Monty and Bruce. They're great guys. I love their game design. And if that's the bottom of the barrel, then I'm gonna hang out in the sludge.
Here's another one. Do you think that you're infamous because people tend to misrepresent your text or content? That's from Cody Martin, just in case, if you want to hear his name.
It's really easy to nitpick individual lines of things and take things out of context just to prove your own point. I do look back on a lot of discussions that I had on the Paizo boards, and I'm like, oh, you know what? That one is going to come back and haunt me, just because there's some threads that go on for 1,000 posts, and people will go and pick out one line, like about throwing water balloons and how that's not a viable game design. So they're like, oh, Sean thinks that water balloons should be viable or not. It's just like, oh, okay, sure. But again, like, people who interact with me in person, this is how I talk to people. I'm very honest and very upfront. There was a discussion, there was kind of a debrief at the end of the Advanced Class Guide playtesting period, and in that thread, people argued that Sean was very argumentative, and he wouldn't listen to people's suggestions. And I said, guys, look, I listened to your suggestions, and I made you work for every single thing you wanted in those classes. Because if you just said, well, I think the class should have this, and I said, okay, you have that, then it just becomes a matter of who yells loudest or who gets my attention. Instead, I made all these people justify every single thing that they thought was good or bad about the class and everything that they wanted to change, because it wasn't designed by committee. It was the three of us, Steve and Jason and I, designing our classes and then opening up to play tests and people giving feedback on that. And if I made you work to get what you wanted in the class, and if you could prove to me that it was something that was good in the class or would be good for the class, then I put it in there. And if you look at the 4 classes that I designed, which are the Hunter, the Skald, the I'm totally blanking right now, the Brawler, and the Slayer, like, the version of those classes that I turned over to editing right before I left Paizo, 99% of that went into the book completely unchanged. And the feedback overwhelmingly has been in favor of how those 4 classes turned out. So clearly I'm doing something right, and they're about the right power level, and people like what happened. And so, yeah, I'm going to argue with you because I'm opinionated, and I've been doing this for 20 years, and I have a preset, batch of conditions and expectations in my head. And if you were just some guy who was, 18, 20 years old in college and haven't been playing D&D since, since before they were born, I've been playing D&D for a lot of these people, like, you need to work hard to prove it to me. And that's okay. And if you can work hard and you can prove it to me, then good for you. That's awesome, because it means you've thought about what you want to have in the game. And if my discussions online are very terse or they are very blunt, it's just because I'm having to write a lot of stuff. Like, Steven and I generally spend about 2 hours a day during the ACG playtest answering comments on the message boards. And that's 2 hours a day that we didn't get to do anything else for our work. It's like, okay, we have this playtest, and it's taking up 25% of our daily design time. So yeah, you know what? I got to do rapid fire responses and go through all that stuff. And we were working hard on getting these things done. But one of the examples I really like to use is RPG Superstar. Hi, Lewis's son.
Hey, Lucas. Oh my goodness! Of course, it's not a event if my son doesn't make an appearance. Ugh. See, I'm talking to Sean. Well, you can talk, but you're gonna have to go in a little bit because I gotta finish some work. So, you're gonna talk to Sean for a few minutes, and then we're gonna get you out of it. We're asking him questions. See, Sean's a big-time designer. He's very, very infamous. And you're gonna say, what does that mean, right?
Can we go to Tate's?
No, we cannot go to Tate's right now. I know that you, like as you see, I've got you in Superman. We're moving in the right direction. But it's late. You should be in bed right now.
There was.
Did you want to watch something? Okay. I'm gonna pull a really cool trick. I've done this before. I'm gonna ask a nice, quick question, and to Sean, I'm gonna run out, put you into bed, and this is gonna be amazing when I do this. So watch. This is a good question. I'm asking a good controversial question too. Do you believe that PFS has killed creativity and fun of Pathfinder as a whole? And then Lucas runs out. Okay.
Wow, that is an incredibly loaded question. I do not think that PFS has killed creativity in Pathfinder as a whole.
Yes.
I do think the organized play campaign structure really has created a beast where, rather than focusing on role-playing and story and having fun, the goal is to burn through the encounter as fast as you can. And it has fostered a situation where every player is trying to build the optimal character so that they can dominate the play experience without really considering that there are other people at the table, and it's really a group game and a group experience where you're supposed to be playing a game with other people and having fun with them. It's not just about your character. And if you are hardcore optimizing your character, you're probably doing so at the expense of other people in the group who aren't trying to hardcore optimize their character. And because the nature of PFS is that you're often playing with strangers, like your optimized character might be hugely more powerful than this other person who doesn't care about optimization at all, because in their home game they don't care about optimization. So suddenly you're doing 2 or 3 times as much damage as this person, and this person is feeling like lame by comparison. That's kind of sad. And so they wonder if, like, are they playing the game wrong? You know, should they be optimizing? Is this what Pathfinder is really about? I've had discussions with John Wick about whether or not D&D and Pathfinder are actually role-playing games, because so much of the game rules themselves talk about this is how you build a character, this is how you fight, this is how you defeat monsters. And John often says, yeah, Pathfinder and D&D are all about being a role-playing game up until combat happens, and then all of a sudden they are combat simulators. And when you have a game that has a 320-page rulebook or a 576-page rulebook, and there may be about 5 pages in that rulebook devoted to what is role-playing and how to role-play, then you realize that more than 99% of the book is about things other than role-playing. And while you can add role-playing to the game, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can say the game is a role-playing game. Like, you can add role-playing to chess. This is the perfect analogy that John has. Like, okay, my pawn is the son of this warrior who was tortured to death by your king. And so my goal for this game of chess is to checkmate your king with this specific pawn. And I win if I do that. Any other situation, I fail. It's like, well, suddenly I've added role-playing to chess, but that doesn't make the chess a role-playing game. So when the game rules really don't talk a lot about role-playing, and when the most common way for people to get involved in playing that game is a very strict rules-based structure where role-playing is not emphasized, I do think it is detrimental to the game as a whole. I don't think it completely, obscures the game, because Paizo sells a lot more books than just the 2 people who play PFS. But there's certainly a factor of people who play PFS, and they are kind of the core of the Paizo game group, just like how Wizards of the Coast / TSR had the RPGA, and the RPGA had a very small set of hardcore people, and a lot of people would say, wow, that's how you play D&D? I don't know if I want to play that. So, I mean, it's easy to paint all of Pathfinder with a really broad brush because of PFS. But I don't think it's fair to do that. And to be fair, like there is a lot of stuff in PFS that drives sales in general for Paizo, and they are a very valuable part of the company's success in that they can expect, okay, we have X number of Pathfinder players, and so this new rulebook is going to come out. We know we're going to sell at least this many books, which means that we can afford to have some less profitable books on the side. So it kind of helps keep the whole company afloat by catering, at least in some way, to this core audience of PFS players.
Okay. Here's another one for you. This is a good one. Since you worked on the Slayer, why does the Slayer have relatively low numbers of talents when compared to, say, the Investigator?
That's a very specific rules design question. I'd have to look at them side by side, but I think offhand, I think it was just because the Slayer has. You know what? I can take a look at that. Let's go on to the next question while we're doing this, just so I can do a little research while it's going on. I'll think about that.
Here's an interesting question. Another one from Cody Martin. Are you still doing classes and such for design work? I'm looking to try and increase my design skills and trying to be better and better work. And you're the only person that says anything like that. Okay, that's an interesting question.
The answer is yes, I am. I had started the design classes kind of in a prototype sort of way in August, and then the actual classes started in September and October, but between my first Kickstarter and my second Kickstarter, those really stretched a lot longer than the initial time period that we had planned. And so I have a student for February. I haven't really opened up any more classes just yet because I want to get the 5 Moons playtest document done. Sorry, I talk a lot with my hands. I don't know if you notice this. But I want to get the playtest document done so then I can have that do its own thing for about a month and then focus on these new students. But yes, I am still doing classes. I will be allowing those to be purchased on my Etsy store probably for March. And the reason why you're not really finding any other classes for it is because I think really I'm the only person doing this. The idea of having an online game design class for tabletop role-playing I think is pretty unique. There's really nothing like it in the game industry right now. I mean, you can take classes or you can even major in video game design, but compared to video games, tabletop is still so much smaller that there really isn't anybody doing something like this. So if other people want to do it, that's great. Until then, it's just me, and I'm one man holding the hat of I'm designing this book and this game and doing classes and everything. So yeah, just keep an eye out on my website and my Etsy store. There will be more classes.
Yes. I mean, everybody knows that I took it, and I wrote a lovely blog post about it that people initially thought I was saying it in a bad way, but I found it very, very informative. I mean, God knows I'm no great designer. I'm not going to even kid myself. But I did learn a lot about the process, and I thought that was very, very interesting. And a lot of people don't, no one tells you how to design a game. You figure out when you start designing and hanging around with guys and asking dumb questions like, well, how do you do it? Oh, I didn't know about that. Oh, that's a great idea. John Wick always has a lot of crazy ideas that I don't even think are even role-playing. I just think they're good ideas for games. And, it's like, wow, that's a great idea. I never thought about it like that. And I think that's talking to guys like that, talking to people who are not like you, give you better ideas and different ideas you didn't think of. I think that's just helpful in the long run.
I'd like to go back to that question about the Slayer versus the Investigator.
All right, go.
Specifically, so I designed the Slayer, and Stephen designed the Investigator. And so the Slayer is like half rogue, half ranger, and the Investigator is half rogue, half alchemist. And the net result for the Investigator is they have such their extract progression is really slow, and their BAB is a lot slower. And the Slayer gets other stuff like its study target that kind of brings in. I mean, there's a lot of elements to designing a class, and part of it is we kind of based each of these hybrid classes on one or the other as a general framework and said, okay, what if we swap out Class A's ability and put in Class B's ability here? And the Rogue is probably one of the weakest classes in the game, in Pathfinder. And there is the temptation to say, you know what, we're just going to completely disregard that the Rogue exists, because if you balance a class against the Rogue, you're going to make a new crappy class. So instead, you're kind of going up the power level a little bit. Yeah, I mean that's a complex question. The Slayer talents mostly feed into the Slayer's combat ability, and the Slayer has so many other combat abilities that I think adding a whole bunch of Slayer talents would make it really super stacked in terms of combat, whereas the Investigator has a lot of its Investigator talents, and a lot of those aren't focused directly on combat, so you can kind of have a broader sort of experience. I think looking at the two from a years later perspective is we didn't want to make the Slayer too much of a super combat monster, and part was that Jason really has a thing about having an even increment of abilities appearing in the class. So, for example, a Slayer gets a Slayer talent every other level, and the Investigator gets Investigator talents every other level. I mean, they really get, let's see, Slayer talents. I mean, it looks like they get the same number, so I'm not really sure entirely why this person thinks that they're getting fewer. It looks like just skimming it, they look about the same. So, I don't know, it's a complex thing, and a lot of it is by feel and not by the math. I mean, you can run the numbers and say, oh, I'm doing this much damage per round, but that's not the only way that you measure a character class's power. So it's a complex question.
All right. How can we make D20 RPG more balanced in the respects to exploration and RP phase of the gaming? This is from Scott Fernandez from the Four Horsemen.
So hi, Scott. That's King of Rock on the Paizo boards. Like I had mentioned earlier, like how many pages you devote to doing combat is a significant factor in what people think the game is about. And so if you devote more pages to exploration and to role-playing, people are going to understand that they need to be spending more time doing exploration or role-playing. If you tie more of the game's rewards to exploration and role-playing instead of just XP for defeating monsters, that again is going to encourage people to do other things. Paizo does this to an extent with story rewards for things like, oh, you've managed to go and discover this one lost artifact that will be of historical importance in a later adventure path. Everybody gets to see our 5 additional story reward. That's useful, but there isn't really anything. There's not a lot of discussion about that hard coded into the rule book itself. And so it's really about what you write about. Like if you write your game where you're focusing on a humanocentric world, like Paizo's Galarian is, then the more you reinforce that, the more people are going to be playing humans instead of other character classes. And Paizo does that by saying, yeah, you know what? Most of the elves are from this kingdom, and most of the dwarves are from this kingdom. And if you're not from there, then you're kind of a weird, like, what is this elf doing here in Osirian? That's really random and strange. So, I mean, in a book that's 120 pages, you've got 80,000 words, and if you spend 20,000 words talking about the value of exploration and the value of role-playing and giving people rewards for role-playing and the benefits of role-playing and, hey, how it's okay to have an entire game session where nobody's rolling any dice and it's just talking stuff out, or an entire game session where you're just exploring hexes in like a Kingmaker style sort of thing and giving rewards, whether they're XP rewards or treasure rewards for that. All of that feeds back into making the game experience more than just killing monsters and taking their stuff. Not that killing monsters and taking their stuff is a bad thing. We had entire generations of role-playing games and video games that are all about, the whole experience is killing monsters and getting their stuff. But if you want more than that in your game, you have to tell the GMs and the players to look for that sort of thing and put that sort of thing into the campaign. Because if you don't tell them, hey, this is important, then the odds of them discovering it on their own are a lot lower than if you actually wave it in their face.
Here's another one. It's from a design perspective, I often hear complaints about balance and power. The mechanics or design are taken out of the global context. Do you think more modern gamers, optimizers, lose sight of the bigger picture?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've had this discussion a lot on the Paizo boards because people say, well, this class is more powerful than that class, or this build is more powerful than this other build. And that terminology comes from games like Warcraft and other MMOs where there isn't really a role-playing element in the game, and there isn't really an exploration element in the game. I mean, you get XP for exploring areas, but most of leveling up is from doing quests where you kill monsters and collect items from them. And the end game function of those games is to do raids where you're getting together with 10 or 20 people and defeating gigantic, powerful monsters that you couldn't defeat alone. And in those sort of raid scenarios, your character has to be the damage character, the damage per second, DPS. And if you are only netting 1,000 DPS and the expectation is to kill this monster in time before it starts doing double damage, because, let me just a little sidetrack, in MMOs, at least in Warcraft, a lot of bosses have this thing called an enrage mechanic, which is, all right, if you haven't killed this monster within 10 minutes of starting combat with it, it's not going to let you nickel and dime it to death. The designers are like, yeah, you know what, you're not up to par with this, and so the monster just starts doing like double or triple damage and starts taking half damage, and it's basically saying your group is going to lose. Come back with better gear. So if you have a damage-based character and you're only dealing about 75% of the damage that the game designers expect you to be able to beat this monster before that enrage timer, then your character is not contributing to the group. And if you have a healer character and you're expected to be able to heal 500 damage per second and you're only healing 300, you're not contributing 100% to the group. And if your tank character isn't, drawing the attention of all these monsters to hit you instead of the more fragile characters, you're not doing your job. And so you have to really focus on what is the best build for my character class, whether that's a mage or a hunter or a rogue or whatever. And if you're doing something different, like, oh, you know what, my spec is really more about sneaking and not getting hit, and you're not doing enough damage, you're screwing over the rest of the players. But in a game that's like a tabletop game, you're really not focusing on the, oh, I have to make sure I do enough damage to kill this boss, because unlike an MMO, when you die, you don't just respawn. In a tabletop game, when you die, the game is either, like, actually, if you have an entire party die, that campaign is over unless you have a second group of players come in. And so usually these games are designed, these tabletop games are designed so that the expectation is that a hard fight for your characters is still something that you reasonably could beat. Like, I have a YouTube video on my channel talking about how a CR-appropriate fight, for example, a group of 4 fifth-level PCs facing a CR5 monster, that's an easy fight. An appropriate challenge is an easy fight. Because if it's not an easy fight, you risk somebody dying, or you risk everybody dying. And if you look at the math, like, if you have 4 NPCs versus 4 PCs, like, that's something like a CR plus 4 challenge. So an even fight between PCs and NPCs of the same level and the same number is, like, it's what the game defines as extremely dangerous, extremely challenging, somebody may die. And that's for NPCs whose gear level is about 1/3 of PCs. Like, if the NPCs had the same amount of gear as the PCs, it would be like a CR plus 5 or CR plus 6 fight. It'd just be hugely difficult. A fair fight is defined as hugely difficult. Don't do this. Because we want you to win. We want you to be able to win at these battles so that you can focus on moving to the next part of the story in the exploration. So, kind of informally and under the hood, it makes combat easier for your characters so that you get to do all that exploration and all that story-based stuff and the role-playing that the GM really wants to get to. And the combat is an integral part of it, but if you just died in a fair fight, that would suck and the game would be over. And so it is really easy for people to lose focus on the, I'm going to make my character the best damage-dealing character ever. And people who argue you should never, if you're a cleric, you should never heal in combat because you're wasting your turn if you're healing people. That's just crazy to me. Because they say that it's a more powerful build to have a cleric that deals damage than to have a cleric that heals. And I say BS to that, because you can't measure how effective a healer is versus how effective a damage-dealing character is. When we first had like the level 12 scenarios open up for PFS, Eric Mona was going to design the first one, and he called all of his most min-max teaser people on staff to build characters so that we would break the game, so that we could challenge his level 12 adventure. So we had myself and Jason Bullman, and I think Wes was there, and I think Steven was there, and I played the healer character, and I jokingly called Invisible Sinbad. He was a high-level cleric, a level 12 cleric. He had a ring of invisibility, and everything was all about channel energy, boosting channels, extra channels, and just avoiding damage. And every round, I was just like, ta-da, I channel everybody. Nobody can attack me because I'm invisible, and channeling energy doesn't break invisibility. Oh, there's enemies nearby? I have selective channeling, so I don't heal them. I just would keep everybody at full, everybody at full, everybody at full. The only reason somebody died in that playtest session was because they got hit for maximum damage, and I was out of range of a Breath of Life spell. No other person stayed at anything other than about half health or higher. So is my character weaker than the guy who's designed to deal tons of damage, like Jason's boar-riding dwarf cavalier? No. You can't measure these things on the the same scale. You can't say, well, I'm doing this much damage and you're doing this much healing, so therefore I'm more powerful than you or less powerful than you. They measure different things. It's this thing, which is sweeter, a margarita or a banana? They're just different scales.
Margarita. Margarita.
Sweet margarita versus salty margarita.
Oh, there you go. See, all right. Cody Martin has another one. This is another one. He basically looks like he wants to be a designer. He goes, how do I get my stuff out there and gain some traction with my work? And you being a third-party guy, you can understand this.
Well, back in the day, it used to be you'd write up something and you'd send it to Dragon and Dungeon, and it would go to their slush pile, and hopefully they would read it within a few months, and they'd say, this is really cool, I want to publish that. But they don't really exist in a I have a slush pile sort of format anymore. So for most people, you have to look at places that have an open call sort of setup. I think Kobold Publishing still has open calls for stuff. RPG Superstar is a great way to do that because that's just you're submitting a magic item or a monster or whatever, and it's being viewed by all these people and voted on. Wayfinder, which is a fan creation, published twice a year, run by Tim Nightingale, who's the guy who founded PaizoCon. He's a big Paizo booster. And I would just keep your eyes out for publishers who are looking for new freelancers. And if you can't get the foot in the door through any of them, you can use the OGL, you can write your own stuff, and just publish it. Either publish it as a free thing and be like, hey, folks, I've got this free 4-page PDF about, basilisk taming feats, or Minotaur spells, or anything like that, and get a few of those posted. I mean, hell, Rogue Genius Games, formerly Super Genius Games, their entire business model is they have a new product every single week, and just people know that they can go back to the Rogue Genius website and be like, what do you guys got? And it's for sale on DriveThru, and it's for sale on Paizo. And if you are a third-party publisher, you can either publish it for free, or once you have a few of those done, just so that you kind of have a little bit of an audience going, just submit it to Paizo, because you can basically sign a contract with Paizo and through DriveThru RPG that they will sell your stuff on their website and give you royalties for every copy sold. It is so easy. It is crazy different now compared to how it was back when I joined the game industry in 1995. If you can write and you can save something as a PDF, you can upload it to one of these many websites that sell PDFs and either do it for free or sell it for money. And if you get your name out there that way, or just keep knocking at the doors of various publishers. One of the things actually somebody suggested for the classes that I'm teaching is like a level 2 class of, hey, I want to be a freelancer, or I want to be a more effective freelancer. What do I do to get noticed? What do I do to let people know that I'm available? Is writing somebody once a month too frequent? Is writing somebody every 6 months not enough? Is it annoying if I say, hey, here's that, I wrote this thing you asked me to do, is there any more work for me? I would love to do more for you. And the answer is once a month is totally fine. Once every 6 months, do it more often than that. And question C is yes, as soon as you turn over something, say, please may I have another. Just be in their faces.
I mean, for myself, and this is kind of the second question also, an artist looking to break in and basically get bigger. Third party is the best way to go. There's tons of third party guys doing stuff, and they're so easy to approach. I mean, even now Paizo has their new thread on their message board for freelancers, for open calls. So if you're interested, just go on Paizo, look in the third-party message board. It's right there. It's very easy. A lot of us tell you what we're looking for. A lot of us tell you our rates. I may always make this joke. Jeff Lee, who wrote for me, met me at PaizoCon. Actually, Jeff Lee and another writer, and I can't remember the writer's name, and this is why. I both gave him an assignment. I said, oh, here's a quick little assignment. Let me see how they come back. Jeff Lee came back within, it was very quick. I got home, and here's work. I was like, wow, this guy's amazing. And it was solid work, and it was really well done. And out of that, his first big writing gig with us was our Usual Suspects book, which we made him do, and this is so horrible when I think about what I made him do on his first writing assignment. He had 54 NPCs he had to do write-ups for. And that's his first writing gig. And they were all awesome. I mean, and I'm just like, we're keeping this guy. He's working for, he'll never have to work with anybody else if he doesn't need to. I will always hire him. It is crazy that I made him do that, and I'm laughing. It isn't funny, but it is funny.
That is a trial by fire right there.
Yeah. What's up, Superman? You just come wailing in? You look a little drunk there? You look a little tired? Can you have some juice? Can you talk to Papa about getting some juice for you?
No.
You see, I'm doing a video. Okay, how about if I promise to get Papa? Let me scream to Papa. Papa, can you get some juice for Lucas? Yeah, he won't say it, but he's afraid of Papa. See, this is. It'll be orange juice for Lucas, right? Oh, apple juice. Changing it up. See, this is what goes on. So grab Papa's gonna get it for you. I promise. I double promise. I know, but I'm doing the video. What? It got you in Superman. At least you look good. I love you. Yeah, this is what fatherhood's really about. If you're ever confused, this is it. This is it. Here's a quick question from me, from Jacob Blackman. When will we be seeing the low magic, no magic setting from Clinton Boomer? That's a good question. I was working on the cover today, so I'm assuming within 3 months. That's the lie I keep telling people. So that's what I'm saying. It's in 3 months. Hey, I'm the boss. I can say that. Justin did that. I'm not answering that question, but that's somebody I know. I'm going to punch him in the face for that question. Clarification on Slayer talent question. I was referring to the number of talent choices available for the class, not the number per character. The Slayer has only 3 or 4 new talents, and the rest are choices of Ranger bonus feats.
Right.
That's
You know, I remember some discussion about this, and I think there were a few more in my initial design draft that were sent over to editing, and I think there were a couple of lines that were cut for space to fit in the book, so there might be some more that are just kind of like, they were cut at the last minute.
Okay, I'm laughing. Jeff Lee just happened to pop up and make a comment to what I said. I still think it was funny. I'm horrible, but I think it was funny.
Oh, and by the way, here's the thing. So also, in the final version, this is the version that's published. You also can select rogue talents in place of a ranger or a slayer talent. That's why there are some. Like, we could have gone and made redundant slayer talents that are basically rogue talents, but by opening up all the rogue talents, that kind of makes up for not having so many unique slayer talents.
Here's another one. How severe do you believe the disparity between non-casting classes, marshals, and full casting classes, casters, in 3.5 and Pathfinder? And what do you think of that?
The answer is it is incredibly severe. The very fact that they use the term linear fighters and quadratic wizards is just because fighters get, kind of a linear incremental sort of power each level, and spellcasters just go up like this because every time a new spell book comes out, a spellcaster can learn spells for that and just stick them in their spell book. And just looking at it from the cleric perspective, like every new book that comes out with a cleric spell, the cleric can access that. They don't even have to spend money to put it in their spell book or take it as a spell known. They just get that in their roster. So right there, that's huge. And I talk about this a bit in one of my blog posts about what I'm doing for 5 Moons, and that if you allow anybody to learn any spell, like 3rd edition does, why can't fighters learn any feat? And each day, instead of preparing a list of spells from if this is your list of spells that you know, say you're a wizard, and each day you prepare these many spells, these are your spells prepared for that day. How come the fighter just can't learn a whole bunch of fighter feats? And then each day it's like, yeah, I'm going to focus on these, and then tomorrow I'm going to do these, and tomorrow I'm going to do these. And that's actually what I'm doing with 5 Moons RPG. It's just like, yeah, you know what? Just like how wizards have a certain number of spells known per day, or spells prepared per day, fighters and other martial classes have a certain number of feats or abilities per day that they can prepare. The advantage that spellcasters currently have is basically a spellcaster can rebuild their character every single day. Like if you're a fire wizard and you're like, I've got tons of fire spells, I love fire, I got fire shield and fireball and firebolt and fire eyes and fire butt and fire feet, and you're like, oh crap, we're gonna fight some fire giants. Okay, magic missile and blink and haste, and the next day your character is entirely different. But if you're the fighter, like, okay, I've got weapon focus longsword, weapon specialization longsword, I got power attack, I've got cleave, I got this and that. It's like, oh, I'm fighting swarms. This is going to be a dungeon full of swarms, or a dungeon full of things that are resistant to slashing damage. I'm screwed, and I'm just going to be ineffective for the rest of the time that I'm in this dungeon. So That's the big difference, and that's the problem with the game right now, and that really stems from Vancian magic versus non-Vancian, non-magical characters, because Vancian magic is the, okay, you can prepare these number of spells per day. And here's the thing. In theory, the balance between wizards and fighters is that the wizards have a limited number of spells per day. And once they cast all those spells, they are crap for the rest of the day. By comparison, the fighter, like the wizard's power is up here once he has all the spells, but then when they're out of those spells, their power goes down to here. The fighter's like here all day long because they never run out of charges on their attacks. And so in theory, X all day long is balanced by X plus 5 versus X minus 5 for the rest of the day. When what really happens is the wizard goes, cast, 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 cast. Crap, I'm out of spells, let's rest. And the fighter says, no, no, I can keep going. The wizard says, I am a drag on the party now, so unless you're a complete idiot, you're going to stop so I can get my fireball spells back. And the fighter says, yeah, you're right. And so they rest. And so what happens is the wizard spends his entire daily time in this power range, and the fighter's here, and there's never a time when the wizard is down here and the fighter is here. Oh. So if you get rid of the whole Vancian idea of, I have these many spells, and they are basically charged items, and I expend them, and then I'm done, versus the I have unlimited use stuff, then you can get outside of that problem between fighters and spellcasters.
Okay, that's available. I guess this is someone who's showing you actually some legitimate love here. One of my favorite books was the Feyun supplement for Lords of Darkness. Yeah, that was my dad in the background. Primarily because the organic construction of all the various layers and hideouts. Any interesting stories to tell about the book's development?
Yeah, Lords of Darkness was... So there were 4 of us working on that, and it was kind of one of these hybrid regional sourcebooks / NPC sourcebooks. And there's a story that I'm kind of infamous for called Donut Cores and Forgotten Rums. And it's because at the time there was a lot of pressure for the Forgotten Rums line to be performing as high as the D&D line did in terms of number of books sold. And so I wrote a little short story about how there are like little bean counter goblins telling the productive elves to make more stuff like Donut Cores versus Forgotten Rums, because, you know, if the donut cores are selling 10 times as much for the same amount of effort, why aren't we just doing donut cores all the time? And so that really kind of became the basically it was kind of a subtle, not so subtle way of saying, you know what, folks, if you like Forgotten Realms stuff and you want to see more Forgotten Realms stuff, you really should go buy Lords of Darkness, because if you don't, they're going to say, why are we spending, you know, $10,000 per book to make this book that makes $100,000 versus $10,000 on this book that makes $20,000. So we need to go and actually have some sales here, folks, so that people go, oh, okay, we're going to have some, there's a reason to keep doing these books. So that was kind of a behind-the-scenes like panic attack that we were having on the Realms team of, it's like, we do really good stuff, but we have so many, the problem that TSR had in the end days was that we had all these different product lines for Birthright and Ravenloft and Core D&D and Dragonlance, and people tended to think of themselves as, I'm a Dragonlance player, I'm a Ravenloft player, I'm a Dark Sun player, rather than I'm a D&D player, and thinking they would see a Ravenloft book and not think, oh, I can use that in my game even though I don't play Ravenloft. I can adapt that to my game. So they kind of fragmented the market. And so Wizards of the Coast is having to deal with a lot of the repercussions of that, because, like, well, I'm a D&D player, I'm not a Forgotten Realms player. So even though this is a really handy source book on a country or these organizations or NPCs, I can't use that in my game. I can't file the serial numbers off of these Forgotten Realms NPCs and use them in my game because it's Forgotten Realms. It's completely unusable in D&D, even though Forgotten Realms is generic D&D. Yeah. So I don't really have any like interesting design concept stories about it, but that one is really us saying, look, folks, these are both D&D. They're just different brands of them. Like, you can like Star Wars and you can like Star Trek, and you can take your Star Trek action figure and tell a little story with Star Wars action figures and have them mix up and fight each other. That's okay to do that. It's okay to mix your two toys together. People aren't going to slap you for doing that. It's just gamers are funny because we get very focused on certain things. Like, no, I only like this one thing. I'm not going to like this other thing, even though it could be totally awesome. So we just got to broaden out that experience a bit.
All right, here's a question for both of us. Have you guys seen Spheres of Power, and what are your opinions on it? Mine's very easy. I have not even had a chance to look at it, so I can't give you an opinion on that.
Could you repeat the book name? I had a little bit just then.
Spheres of Power.
Spheres of Power. Oh, okay. No, I have not read that.
Yeah, I keep hearing about
Sorry.
it, and I've not read it. It's, come on, dude, we're busy. We got to run companies.
I mean, it's funny and it's kind of sad, but to be honest, like when I was working at Paizo, I didn't even have time to read all of the books that Paizo was producing because Paizo makes a lot of books. You got the core line, which I worked on. You got the player companion line. You got the modules line. You have all the scenarios. You've got the campaign setting line. You've got fiction. It's just like there's just so much material. It's just like, okay, I don't have time to read even the stuff that my own company produces. So, and then there's just like all these third-party publishers out there producing all this stuff that I hear is great, and every now and then I'll be like, okay, I really should read this because people are talking about it. But for the most part, it's just like I don't have time. Like I need to sleep.
Yeah, don't remind me. Here's another one. Do you prefer a game that has levels and classes like D20 and Pathfinder, or a more freeform character build was done in Shadowrun and World of Darkness games? Which one do you feel style is more creative and open than the other?
Certainly, the freeform sort of one like Shadowrun is a lot more creative in that you can just build whatever you want. But most of my play and GM experience has been with the classes and levels one, and this actually discussion has come up several times with what I'm doing with Five Moons RPG because I'm kind of just there's a lot of framework for classes and levels. I'm saying let's take that out. Like the warrior class in my game, instead of learning a fighter combat feat, you can just learn a spell. Like, hey, you know what? I'm 5th level. I'm a fighter. I'm gonna learn Fireball. It's like, how can you do that? It's like because I can. I'm a wizard. I want to learn power attack. Sure, sounds good. You can just learn that. And so people said, well, hey, if you're going to broaden it out that much, why don't you broaden it out this much and just get rid of the classes and levels bit? And the answer is that classes and levels are just such an easy thing to grok in so many games. Like no matter what sort of fantasy or sci-fi game that you play, if you tell people you're a brand new character, you're level 1, people get that. Or if you tell people, okay, you're a brand new character, the expectation is you're level 1. But with a point-based sort of game, it's like, okay, I'm a 30-point character versus a 20-point character. Okay, so is that good? Like, is a brand new character a 10-point character? So does 30 points mean I'm starting really buff, or I don't know. So there's just not really a framework for what the minimum baseline is. And because for the past 20 years I've been working on level-based games, my most familiar and comfortable area of design is working on those sort of games. Now, who knows, 7 years from now, 10 years from now, after I've worked on 5 Moons for a while, I might want to broaden that a bit and try be more experimental and go into a more point-based sort of thing. But right now, it's just like, you know what? I tell people, write what you know, and what I know are level and class-based systems, and I'm willing to broaden it out to this, but not quite willing to do that just yet.
Here's another one for you. What books did you actually have significant work on? I've heard that you were blamed for the monk, and I don't believe you were hired at the time. What else have you done? 4chan really wants to know.
Hi, 4chan. So, yeah, it's funny that people think I hate the monk and that I destroy the monk. But I've got a cat fight in the background. Hold on. Cat's not enough. So, when Wizards was working on 3rd edition D&D, the design team at various points was Monty Cook, Skip Williams, Jonathan Tweet, Rich Baker, and Peter Atkinson. I was not on the design team. I was working on Greyhawk at the time. And I was actually called on. I had a bunch of feedback for spells for the player's handbook that I gave to them that they took a lot of notes on. And I was actually the first person outside the design team to design any monsters for 3rd edition. I had nothing to do with any of the class design. I mean, I play tested just like everybody else on staff did, but I don't think I ran a monk. So I had nothing to do with the 3rd edition monk. For Pathfinder, the Pathfinder Alpha was written by Jason as his own house rules and adapted into Pathfinder Alpha. That was written before I started working at Paizo, so I had nothing to do with the Pathfinder Alpha. The Pathfinder Beta went to print before I started working at Paizo. I'm actually not even credited in the Pathfinder Alpha or the Beta because I was not an employee at the time. Core Rulebook I was around for, and I'm listed as additional design for. I actually don't remember what design I did, but I certainly do not remember doing any design for the monk. I think there's probably just supplemental stuff for magic items and spells. So I don't know where the idea of, oh, I wrecked the monk or I did ruin crossbows or anything. I don't know where that came from because I was not working on those books at the time. When I was hired at Paizo, I was the developer for the player companion line and for the campaign setting line, the 32-page or the 64-page campaign setting line, and the modules. So I had nothing to do with the core line at all. It wasn't even a core line. It was just Jason. And it wasn't until after the core rulebook came out and they realized we're going to need more people to help Jason out with this that they put me on that team, even though I still wanted to be working on the other stuff that I was working on because I really liked the campaign setting specific flavor, but they decided to add me to the core team. So it's just Jason and I. So I didn't work on the monk. I didn't work on crossbows. I think I worked on the APG in terms of I did development on spells and magic items. And then Ultimate Magic, I did most of the development on that. And Ultimate Combat, not so much. I was actually writing the beginner box at the time. So Jason and I were working in the beginner box, and Stephen Randall McFarlane was doing Ultimate Combat. Ultimate Campaign, I did the revision of the Kingmaker rules. I did a revision of the retraining rules and the downtime system. And for the Advanced Class Guide, I did the Slayer, the Brawler, the Hunter, and the Skald. And for NPC Codex, I worked on some of the classes. I don't remember exactly which. I know I did Paladin. And for Monster Codex, I developed a few of those sections as a freelancer after I left Paizo. So I could go book by book and tell you what, but like because there's so much material that we were producing, the books generally were like there's 3 designers on staff, and like I would do this chunk, and Stephen would do that chunk, and Jason would do that chunk. So it was often very much like I worked on this section, and I didn't work on any other things. So anybody wants to send me an email or post on my fan page or on a reply to my blog post, I can itemize as much as I can about a lot of these things. But I kind of laugh about the whole I hate monks thing and the hate crossbows things. People think that I hate gunslingers, and that's how the gunslinger came to be, because it's kind of funny because it's either I hate gunslingers and they made them crap, or I love gunslingers and that's why they're broken. But either way, I actually didn't work on Ultimate Combat. I worked on the feats section of Ultimate Combat as the developer, and that's it. So it's one of those things where you hear a rumor and it gets propagated as truth to the next person. Back when I was the TSR Online guy, there were so many times where I'd have to be on the news groups, and someone would say, well, this guy at my game store says blah, blah, blah. It's like, you know what? The guy at your game store probably doesn't know what he's talking about.
Nice.
To be fair. Like, he wants to look like he's a person in authority. He's like, oh, that product line was canceled. I'm like, really? The next 3 books that I see people working on are right here. I don't know why I don't know this, and this guy at the game store knows that this product line is canceled. Maybe the guy at the game store is just trying to look important. So, don't know.
Only a couple more, but we got to get out of here. But someone has to go to sleep. Good Lord. Is Five Moons being released on the OGL, or will you be licensing it out as its own rule set?
I haven't really reached a firm decision on that yet. I don't know if I want to go and just open it up completely like the OGL, or if I want to go and have a more limited license like what Monty and Sean are doing with Numenera. It really depends on how things go in the next 5 months with development and playtesting and other stuff going on. But I definitely have my ears open. I already have people who are wanting to know just so they can publish stuff compatible with it, which is very flattering. I mean, the game isn't even in playtest yet, but people are already knocking at the door to write more for it. But when I have a decision about that and I go public with it, I'll make sure that the news is spread and people will know.
Okay. This question is from someone I'm sure you're familiar with, Timothy Nightingale. Sean, you ran a high-level game in the Paizo office to find out just how well or not a high-level game works out. While this is never completely finished, did you get any insight from coming away with any good info from that? I'm going to mispronounce it. Felixian? Oh, good Lord.
Fixafan.
Thank you. Wants to know.
Let's go to Fixafan. So Tim Nightingale is the editor-in-chief of Wayfinder. He's the guy I mentioned earlier. He's the founder of PaizoCon. Hi, Tim. Yeah, when I agreed to do that campaign, I actually was planning on doing a low-level Drow campaign. but we on the design team were already starting to put together just the core concepts for the Mythic book. And oh yeah, I forgot about the Mythic book because it's just kind of a sidetrack. I worked on parts of Mythic too. Obviously, I didn't include that in the earlier listing, but we were starting to work on Mythic. But the question was like, you know what? A lot of people are going to use Mythic as a substitute for Epic, and we don't know how well Pathfinder handles really high-level play. And so I said, you know what? I'll take a bullet for the team. My Drow game, instead of being a low-level exploration game, is going to be a high-level crazy-ass. Everybody starts at 12th level, and you're all evil Drow nobles from the same house. And it was a really fun campaign, and a lot of crazy stuff happened. Yes, it answered a lot of questions about high-level play, and people who think that just fighters suck clearly have never seen a level 14 Drow fighter dual-wielding kukris and routinely getting crits and dealing hundreds of points of damage every round. So kudos to you, Crystal, for doing that. Yeah, I mean, the system math starts to break down in general at that high, because you get to the point where if it's your good save for a typical monster's saving throw or a typical monster's DC, you can't fail. And if it's your bad save, you can't succeed. So choosing monster attacks really becomes kind of a meta game of, all right, this monster probably is something that has poor reflex save, so I'll use one of my reflex save-based spells because I know it can't make the save, and therefore it'll take maximum damage. Or this guy has a low fort save because obviously he's a wizard, so I'll use a reflex save or a fort save because that'll instantly kill him. No point using a will spell at all. The disparity between like class skills and non-class skills gets really high. The disparity between hit points for different classes gets really high. I mean, there's a lot going on where you have highs and lows, and they just skew out over time. So yeah, the playtest was really valuable, and a lot of what we did in Mythic was to try and build a situation where your character could do cool things that weren't just simply adding to the math of what you could do. So if your high-level fighter had a Mythic ability from having a Mythic tier, it wasn't like, oh, and you can deal an extra 10 points of damage. It was something more like, you can jump 30 feet and make an attack, which is something you normally couldn't do. Or you could make people re-roll their saves on spells, or you could, reposition people on the battlefield, that sort of stuff. So, yeah, it was a fun campaign. You guys were all very crazy. I have a lot of photos from it on my fan page on Facebook, by the way. We learned a lot, and what we learned from that definitely became a factor for what we did in the Mythic book. And while Paizo generally doesn't do a lot of high-level stuff, like the last volume of an AP is kind of the high-level sort of stuff where you get to be at level 14, maybe 16. So I'm sure that, considering that Rob is and Rob and James, who are the developers of the Paizo APs, both played in that campaign, I think they got a good sense of how weird and crazy things get in an active high-level campaign where everybody's just maximum power and knows how to build their characters. So yeah, it's definitely valuable.
Okay, this was another weird one. I think it's fair to say that the time since you left your previous job, the FAQs release subsided substantially. How important do you feel is to answer FAQs that players have?
Well, there's really two different categories. One is hey, this thing doesn't seem to have the required information. What is this required information? Like, what's the range of this hex? Or what sort of saving throw should this hex have? I mean, that's critical information that's really FAQ as errata. And that's definitely very critical. Other sort of answers are things where it's like, how does A plus B plus C fit together? And most of the time, it's like, you know what? The GM should be empowered to make a ruling, and the players have to accept that and move on. And I understand that in PFS, sometimes they don't have that luxury, and they can either petition the heads of Pathfinder Society to come up with their own ruling, and in many cases, that involves them coming to the design team and saying, hey, we've been getting a lot of questions about this. Can you guys make this FAQ a priority? In which case, the design team will try and do so. Or the design team will say, you know what, that's a complex question, and the answer for PFS might be different than what it is for a regular game, so you guys could go ahead and make your own ruling on that for now. So, I mean, and there's a third element of, we want to show that we are engaged with the player community. Like, we're not sitting here in this ivory tower and just dictating our rulings. And a lot of the discussion that comes from the results of a FAQ which is usually me looking at people's answers and saying, well, but you answered this, but we also have corner case part 1 and part 2. How do we resolve that? And then sometimes we'll revise the fact to incorporate that. That is important to let the players and the GMs know that we are listening to what they have to say. And in some cases, like, they will get an unpopular ruling reversed. Like the whole idea of monks not being able to use the same weapon for every single attack in a flurry of blows, and how that there was a question about whether or not that was true, and we ended up making a FAQ about it and saying, no, you can't use the same weapon over and over for your flurry, and people just freaked out, and they justifiably said, you know what, all these characters that you have built since the dawn of Pathfinder don't say anything about that, and they actually say the exact opposite. They're built using the same weapon flurrying over and over again. And the reason for that was, when that fact question first came up, I went to Jason and said, can you use one weapon for all your attacks in a flurry? Because I need to build it into the spreadsheet that Paizo uses to build its stat blocks, so that everybody who makes an official product for Paizo will have the right build for this monster. This creature will have the thing incorporated right according to the rules. And Jason said, yes, they can do that. So I built it into the spreadsheet and forgot about it. And years go by with all these monsters and NPCs having flurry with the same weapon over and over again, and people are like, well, how come you can't say yes you can or no you can't? These are contradicting. And we went and revisited the language of the flurry of blows text, and Eric Mona went to Jason and said, this doesn't make sense. The words in this paragraph don't make sense. These literally, this is not even a sentence. And what it was is just the last minute, something was changed in layout and didn't get edited. Because sometimes last minute changes are done in layout and they don't get edited. And unfortunately, that introduced this ambiguity. But if you look at the precedent for like the introduction to the monk class in the pre-Pathfinder relaunch in the blog, you could see that Jason had intended something to work this way, but then the final wording made it unclear, and the net result was that Jason said, you know what? Even though our fact says that no, you can't use one weapon for every single flurry, we have built all these characters like this, and it is certainly easier to run the game allowing you to do that. So we're going to change the fact. We're actually going to say, yes, you can use the same weapon over and over again for all your flurries. And that is a perfect example of the fan community, the player community, GM community, coming together and saying, you know what, we disagree so strongly with this ruling, and we think it's confusing, and we really think it's better for the game to have it this other way, that the designers listened and responded and agreed. Now, a lot of people were real jerks about it, and they're like made a lot of offensive comments. They said, designers are on drugs, designers are retarded, and that wasn't very productive, and that actually delayed implementing any sort of their willingness to implement any sort of change. But the fact is that, we're human, we make mistakes, and the three of us didn't always agree on things, but we did listen to what people had to say, and sometimes what people had to say made enough sense that we said, yeah, we're going to change that. As for whether or not things are going slower or not, I think this is my personal opinion. I don't have any insight, but when I was at Paizo, and as I was the guy in charge of FAQs, I made it a point to say, hey, here are 3 different FAQ issues that we can give an answer to. I'm going to write out an answer. I'm going to send it to Stephen and Jason. They'll give me answers, and I'm going to lean on them and be like, hey, and it's usually Jason, to be honest. Sorry, Jason. But it's just like, Jason, yeah, I need you to answer this email. I need you to answer this email. It's been 3 days. Answer this email. Answer this email. I walk into his office. Will you answer your email, please? Take 10 seconds and says, yes, sounds good, and we post it. The new guy in charge of FAQs, Mark Seater, he is the new guy, and so he probably doesn't feel like he should just get up in Jason's face and Steven's face and Logan's face and be like, will you answer this? Please answer this. Come on, guys, answer this. He doesn't want to be that guy. I've met Mark. He's a good guy. Not a fault to him. It's like you don't want to have the new guy be the one telling everybody else what to do, and so I think the delay in a lot of these facts is just that Mark's going, yep, we're all busy. We got these other play tests. I mean, things always happen. There's always stuff going on in the publishing biz. There's an old Dragon magazine editorial by Roger Moore where he was talking about how in the magazine business, you're always counting down to the next deadline. It's, T minus 29 days, T minus 28 days, T minus 27 days. And then the day after you publish the book, it's not T plus 1. It's T minus 29 for the next deadline. There's always something coming up. And so it's really easy for answering an FAQ to be pushed off one more day or one more week because you have a playtest or it's a Gen Con crunch or somebody's out sick. It happens. It sucks, but it happens just because there's only so many hours of the day, and everybody at Paizo is really, really busy, and they work really hard, and they work extra hours to get all those products done.
Okay. This is going to be the last one, guys, because we're already 30 minutes over from what we thought we were going to be. And this could go on all night. I know how crazy we are, so the last question. I understand that you didn't look closely at the ACG. I do agree the classes were I do agree that your classes were more polished than others, even playing the Hunter right now. The editors didn't do much in general, so I don't know if bragging about the few changes when we're sent into the editors are worthy. That's a kind of awkward way that I put that together. This is probably from maybe like about maybe an hour ago that we spoke about. I don't know.
Well, so here, I think I know what you're getting at. You're saying, well, there weren't many editorial changes because, from what I've heard, the editorial level of quality on the ACG is lower than what people have been expecting with Paizo. That's what I've heard. I don't have any comments about that because that all happened after I was done. Like the week I left Paizo was when we handed that stuff over to editorial. So I don't know what other things were going on that made this issue happen. But I need to clarify that the design team designed those classes, and then we all took some time developing those classes, and then we passed that text over to the editors. The editors do not make rules changes. So when I say the stuff that I worked on that I turned over to editors is almost exactly the same as how it ended up in the printed book, I'm saying that at no time, or for very, very minor amounts, did Stephen and Jason feel that anything that I wrote needed to be changed. And I'm saying that is because I know there are people out there who don't like me, and they're like, Sean, your class sucks, and I'm sure that your class sucked when you turned it over, and the rest of the designers just fix it up for you because you totally suck, and the final version's good, but you suck. And the truth is that I might completely suck, whatever, but what I'm saying is, like, I have the documents that I turned over, and I have the final version that's in the book, and they are almost exactly the same. So the rules text that I created, people are satisfied with. Now, the editorial changes and whether or not some things were like worded differently or cleaned up for, certain aspects of grammar or whatever, that's an entirely different issue. So if your concern is that, well, I think the quality of editing was lower than normal overall, and therefore your class isn't as good as you think it is, that's not really valid criticism because the editors don't make rules changes. They edit rules text, but the editors are not tasked with saying, this really should be a +2 instead of a +3, for example. So criticizing the editing is one thing, criticizing the design is a different thing. Both of them are perfectly valid things to criticize, but there's very little crossover between the two. Now, to be fair, the editors are familiar with the game rules, and the editors sometimes pinch hit as developers, but their role as editor is discrete from their role as developer.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for answering that. I mean, good Lord, we have like a ton of questions, but we've got to stop because some of us have to get up at 5:30 in the morning, and some of us are going to be sleeping in bed till like 9. That's not going to be me. So once again, I want to thank Sean K Reynolds for coming out, being kind enough to answer some of these crazy questions, hearing some very scary and interesting stories, which makes it a little, just a little peek behind the curtain, see what goes on here. I mean, I'm glad we didn't have to, abuse anyone or call somebody out and stuff. I just saw this little comment. Sean, if you suck, I want to suck too. I just thought that was great. It's like, what?
Thank you.
If you're gonna suck, that's how you do it. That's how you do it.
I would like to say, by the way, just I'm very open to questions, and like I'm easily accessed on my Facebook fan page, and whenever I post stuff on my blog, which is SeanKReynolds.wordpress.com, So go ahead and just drop questions there, or use the feedback form from my blog or on my fan page, and like I will answer questions. Like I don't usually have time to get into specific rules questions of why is this +2 instead of +3, but like the reasons in general for like why this was done instead of that. I love talking about game design, and I will answer your questions. So just fire away. If anything here that you think was left unfinished or kind of sparked another idea, or if your question didn't get answered, just fire away. I'm here.
That's very, very cool. Well, once again, thank you so much for coming out. Thanks, everybody, for coming by. I'm assuming this is going to be on YouTube when we're done, so if you haven't watched it now, you can watch it again and leave little comments, and we'll come back and we'll like say bad things about you and your mother on them. It'll be fun. It'll be a lot of fun for everybody. That's what I feel. All right, thank you so much, everybody. Have a good night, so I can go to bed and put Lucas finally down with a tranquilizer or something. Talk to you all later.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Lewis.
All right, no problem. Bye-bye.